Ah. Yeah, grabando. Yep. Already recording. Hi, Pau. Pau. Okay, this is a research introduction classroom, and I'm going to introduce you our guest. But first of all, she's a very, very good friend of mine. I love Lawrence. She's a wonderful person, and I always tell her I will work with her and never did it. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, in a very formal way, Lauren is currently the co-founder and captain director. I would love to know more about the captain director position. I did you apply for that or?
No, that's as the
Were you
co-founder.
interviewed for that?
Well, pirate captain seemed a little bit too casual, so we went for
Okay.
captain.
Okay, no pirate, but captain. Okay. She's currently the co-founder, a captain director of ArtsQ. They've been reviewing ArtsQ webpage and Instagram profile, so they already know something about that. ArtsQ is a new venture into making art history fun and engaging for the young and young at heart. That's always a difficult concept for me, that young at heart. I'm not sure if I'm one of them. You are. I'm not sure about that. Before that, she was Dean of Content and Strategy at Smart History. That interests them a lot. They are eager to know something about Smart History. They love Smart History. Smart History is a hit in our university. I think so. And she was professor. Were you or still are professor in Pepperdine?
I was a professor of art history at Pepperdine.
Okay. Um, okay, that's my formal introduction for Lauren, but most of it, Lauren is my friend. I love her. I hope I'm sure you are going to love her after this talk. And did you have questions? No, I'm good. No, everyone is okay. They were ready for clapping. Okay, let's clap.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you for inviting me again, Javier. And it's really nice to meet everyone. I think a couple other people maybe walked in, but it's nice to see faces.
First of all, do you have a presentation?
I do, and I'm about to share my screen.
Then I'm gonna need to do you need to be host.
That's right.
Yeah. And now you're the host.
Okay. It's always more fun when we can see things, right?
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, of course. Now, let me make sure I have to do a new share so you're just seeing the fun part. Okay, so you're just seeing the slideshow without all the little tiny slides, right? I hope.
Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it's really nice to see everyone this morning, and I wanted to keep things casual today. So if you have questions as they come up, please just ask them. You do not have to wait till the end. It's more fun to have it be conversational and, you know, to answer questions in real time. So I was asked to come and talk with you all about public art history in terms of how to craft or think about public art history today. And it's something that at this point, I feel confident in saying I have some knowledge about, and I've been doing this a long time. So I thought I would give you a little bit of background as to how I got here, since it's kind of relevant to why I continue to do public art history, and then give you some ideas about how you do it. You know, not just why you want to do it, but how do you actually go about taking steps to maybe do something to craft public facing art history materials, for lack of a better term. So I've already been introduced, but I thought I would give you a little bit more about, you know, why I'm here. So you've seen my former titles, and now I am part of this ArtsQ. We're very young, but it's myself and 3 other art historians. So all people who are professors of art history or who have been professors of art history who felt an urgency to focus on pipeline issues. Essentially, how do we make people prior to college more interested in and aware of art history, since at least in the United States, very few people in the kind of kindergarten through 12th grade have opportunities to study art history, let alone know what that means. I was one of them. I didn't know what art history was until I happened to take a class randomly as a biology major as an undergraduate in college. So it's something where we're trying to find ways to, I think, help kids, but also, like I said, kids at heart, people who maybe feel a little more intimidated by art history as a term. My kids tell me that I'm not allowed to use the words art history, that it's very boring. Now, as a scholar, most of my research has focused on the art of the Spanish Americas in Mexico, in Peru, also working on the Iberian Peninsula. And I mention that not only because I think research is such an important part of what we do for public art history, but also because I think working in a field that's, at least in the United States, been perceived as kind of not kind of fitting into certain boxes or traditional categories of art history, made me, from grad student forward, always questioning categories and how we put things into neat boxes. And, is there a way to get around those? Or maybe we need new categories, and kind of thinking about how to position myself as a scholar has been really instrumental in terms of also how I teach and how I conceive of art history and public art history. Because it turns out, when you're trying to market yourself, whether it's on the job or for a talk or an article in a journal, and it's geared more towards, European Renaissance, and you're like, but I swear the Americas have something of value here, and they're like, oh, do they? Like, you're not quite here, but you're not quite there. And that's kind of been
May I, Lauren?
Yes.
I think that was one of the first things everyone noticed with smart history. I mean, the importance smart history gave to Spanish Americas or early modern somewhere else than Europe was
Yes.
Was one of the things that interested us the most when first arriving to smart history. And these two wonderful books you are showing us here, I would like to highlight the fact that first of all they were edited by Brit, which is one of the most important presses in the whole world, but also the name of Walter. I mean, Walter, as the series editor, is one of the most important art historians in art history. Walter is a wonderful person. I love him very much, but also he's he's a most important scholar today. And I'm sorry, this is a long question, but
Yeah.
this is what art historians do. But you decided to take another path, and I think this is the most important thing about you and your work.
Well, I appreciate that. In some ways, I've had a very traditional career path. I got the PhD. I started my career at a big public university system, but with graduate students and undergraduate students and publishing. But like I said, I think working in a field that at least way back when I was younger, wasn't as popular or as instrumental as I think it's become. And teaching odd things definitely made me somewhat non-traditional. And so, to get to your point about the Spanish Americas at Smart History, that was that was initiated by me when I was teaching a very large lecture class and was frustrated by textbooks and I think their lack of coverage, not only of the indigenous Americas, but also there was nothing on the Spanish Americas at that point. There was zero. There were no textbooks at that point. There was nothing. And I had been working at the University of Oregon with Stephanie Wood, who's an amazing scholar, if you don't know her work, but she was really doing these incredible things in something called digital humanities. And I remember thinking, like, what is digital humanities? This was in 2008. And she got me involved in some projects. And that was my first foray into public art history before that term existed. And it was really because of Stephanie and her kind of groundbreaking work there, experimenting, that kind of really shaped the path that I've taken. I didn't know it at the time, but that's been very clear to me over the years. I think something that also has led me on this less traditional path for art, as an art historian, is also just, again, doing the very on the surface, very traditional things, doing a lot of service, a lot of editing, a lot of talks, here in the United States and also internationally. And I think through all these experiences, keeping in mind, who am I doing it for, but also how do I translate my work so that more people care about the things that I care about, right? Whether that's the specific art that I'm talking about or the issues or the themes, how can I get more people excited to teach, Sor Juana's portrait, if they don't even know who she is. And so trying to find opportunities where I can help emerging scholars or help colleagues or a broader public has been very important to me, in my publications, in my talks, in my service, and I think most importantly in my teaching. And this is really where I think my urgency for getting more involved in, what we call public art history, public facing art history has been really clear. When I first took my first tenure track job at the CUNY system, the City University of New York, I had to teach a 1-semester global survey. So the whole world throughout time in 1 semester, which was a really daunting task, an impossible task. And it was a class that every single undergraduate had to take before they graduated. So it was a class I taught a lot. And needless to say, there was no textbook at the time that could do that work effectively, or they were just very expensive, but also they left out so much, in my opinion, about the things, again, that I cared about, the issues that I cared about. So I started cobbling things together, and I think the funniest part about that moment that I'll share with you all is I was, very fired up, and I wrote this manifesto, like a 10-page manifesto. I felt very like early 20th century, artist manifesto. And I wrote this manifesto of like how we need to change the field of art history and like how could we serve students better in the classrooms and, cultures and peoples and ideas from other parts of the world that, we're always kind of left out, and how these issues could be really important. Yeah, and I didn't do anything with it, but it felt really good to get it out there, at least, way back when I wrote that in 2010. And, so I started cobbling things together. I started practicing making videos for my students to kind of begin to see how I myself could craft something for them. And then I started seeing the need surpassed even my classroom, that maybe if my students were interested in these things, maybe other people's students were interested in these things, and maybe even students outside the classrooms who weren't traditional students might be interested in some of these materials. And so I think my all of that kind of brief background, and I'm happy to answer more questions, is largely what has kind of been the primary impetus for me to continue working publicly. I think in more recent years, kind of new ideas and projects have emerged that have made that feel more urgent even. For instance, I think during COVID, obviously that really shifted how people are engaging with things in a more digital or online environment and how we have access to things or don't have access to things. I think that in terms of public art history, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of I would love to see, more people doing it and getting creative about how they do it. But I also think that, there's a lot of, depending upon the project, there's a lot of challenges that maybe don't get discussed enough. And if that's of interest to you all, I'm happy to talk more about that. In terms of, how, whether that's gatekeeping or whether that's, the invisible labor that goes into some of these types of projects, if you're doing big projects in public art history. But ultimately, when we're thinking about crafting public art history, the thing that continues to drive me is two questions, actually. And that is, who is art history for? Who is it for? Who do I want it to be for? And that's a personal question for anyone who's interested in public art history, I think, to answer is, who is art history for? And who am I doing it for, right? Is part of that same question. And then that leads to, why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? And what's the point?
I'd like to say a couple of things, if I may.
Sure.
First of all, you just mentioned gatekeeping. And I'm not sure if my students understood the full extension of the word, but that's quite important because when you are mentioning gatekeeping, you are mentioning a situation where art history is a very elite activity and is made basically by white male old people who are basically talking to themselves. That's number one. And number two, in your previous slide, you were talking about, and it's okay, don't change it, because it's related with the questions you were talking about right now. You were talking about if what we are doing could be interesting for anyone else. And I think that's the key question here. If we really believe this is not only an activity for gatekeepers and only for gatekeepers, I think we are doing things the wrong way, absolutely the wrong way. So I wanted to stop just a little bit there and maybe they knew perfectly about gatekeepers or maybe not, but I wanted to introduce the fact that this is not an activity for white male scholars of 70 years old or so.
No, I mean, I'm glad you paused there and I'm happy to talk more about gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is something that I think everyone experiences in different ways in most, I guess, most jobs. But I think in academia and art history, it's something that is definitely, it continues to be a challenge and it has certainly shaped the field. If I'm speaking very personally, I've experienced gatekeeping, like I said, people telling me that what I work on is not European enough, but it's not, indigenous enough, or it's not non-Western enough. And so, it's like you're shut out from certain, whether that's funding or publications or opportunities, because, you don't kind of fit into those, what you were saying, Javier, kind of how the field has been shaped by largely kind of white men, primarily European white men, and as the focus of the field. And I think that public art history, and we can talk about how we define that too, is one way I think that can be useful in terms of moving around certain types of gatekeepers. Unfortunately, there's always going to be different types of gatekeeping where, wherever you're doing, even in public art history, that's certainly true. I think that something that feels very important to me and has remained so is trying to make people feel very empowered that they can use their unique voice and their unique perspective and their ideas to engage in public art history. It doesn't have to be in some kind of massive project with millions of moving parts, right? That you can do certain aspects or certain types of public art history in a very relaxed way that kind of suits your needs or kind of is answering these questions that you have here. Who's it for? Why am I doing this? Who am I doing it for? And, but that doesn't mean that the gatekeepers won't try to still create barriers. Sometimes, excuse me, I've had people tell me that I'm no longer a serious art historian because I engage in public art history. And that's something that, oh yes. And that's something that, I've literally had people say, you're no longer a serious art historian, point blank to my face.
Oh my gosh.
It does not, yes.
Well, I am not maybe the right person. I'm aware of that. I am not the right person to be telling this because I am a male, European white guy, and I'm getting old. So I have almost all requirements for being a gatekeeper. And I'm pretty sure you are aware of the recent argument about SCSC annual conference dates this year, just in the week of Halloween, and
I
how
know.
You all women, and you are completely right, put on the table the matter of what the hell are you doing, guys?
I am aware of that argument. I was very sad to see it was on Halloween for that reason.
And again, I'm not the right person because I'm not on the council.
Yeah, it's I think that the challenges are real. When I've had people lament that, I've shifted more to public art history and away from more serious, research art history, it used to upset me or it used to bother me, but I've developed a slightly thicker skin for it. But I also remember who I'm doing it for, right? I'm not doing it for the other scholars. I'm doing it because I want art history to be exciting and engaging and fun or upsetting to people outside of academia, right? Like if I can get through to my mom, who that's a win. If I can get my kids excited or, my extended family, none of whom are academics or art historians and really have no experience with it, then I feel like I'm doing something right. And so I think you'll hear me repeat this throughout this talk, is always to have that question of who am I doing it for? Because when you hit the gatekeepers or you hit the barriers, unless they're the people you're doing it for, and that's a whole other issue, but it's such a good reminder to be able to move past those challenges that you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for whoever your intended audience is. And in my case, I'm myself and my other co-founders of ArtsQ, Heather Graham, Courtney Chaffin Kim, and Ellen Larson, we all really feel strongly that we want to make things more engaging in terms of the history of art for a younger generation. And so for me, like my inspiration is here, my kids, at the back of their heads, at least you can see them. I'm largely doing this for them because I want them to, in a very ideal way, live in a better world, develop better empathy, have more cultural sensitivity, be able to, go to different places and be in new situations where they can engage with people and feel comfortable in their discomfort when they're kind of the fish out of water experience. So, I know this is just, you all have been to the website, but this is the Arts Queue. It's very lovely. My co-founder, Ellen, designed this. She's an amazing graphic designer. So I always have to shout it out. But so public art history, what I really wanted to do today was, if I love the questions. I'm happy to answer all the questions, but I really hope that some of you are kind of interested in like, not just what is it theoretically, but also how do you tiptoe into it, or what are some steps, toeholds that you can take if this is of interest to you. And so public art history, what is it? In a very basic way, if we were to define it, it is essentially just engaging in public facing art history, meaning that you are writing about or talking about art history for people outside of academia, right? And in terms of public, that's perhaps too big of a category. I prefer to think of it as publics, who are you aiming it towards in a particular group? But it's in a kind of more expansive way. I like to think of public art history as really trying to, I said, like democratize art history, or to really, it is read as so elitist and so white. And how can we find different pathways or take different steps to alter that? And it's going to be a slow process, right? It's not going to happen overnight. But I think my end goal, the why am I doing this beyond the fact that I want to do this for, my kids and my mom. I'm doing this because, I want people to see that there is beauty and elegance and excitement and just good stories in the history of art that can, inspire them or upset them, or have relevance for them in their lives. They don't have to go get a degree or a PhD in art history to appreciate it. Or that they can go to, the movies, and they see a reference to something that now they know something about, and that makes it more meaningful. Like, it doesn't have to be some like grand, inspiring idea. Like the idea that people can just in their daily lives find even small meaning in art history in some capacity is one that also I really want for everyone, since we, all of us know here that art history is fantastic and amazing, and we want that to be how everyone else feels. So, but how does one do it? How does one go about beginning or starting? And so I actually wanted to ask a question to all of you, just to hear what you have to say, and that is, how many of you are interested in using your knowledge or expertise or skills to reach new audiences? I see some hands.
Is I personally, I'm terrified of publicly talking about art history. I'm like, someone's gonna say you're stupid, and I'm terrified of that. So I don't want someone to be like, she doesn't know anything, and then I get canceled. So that's why I never want to like publicly be like, this painting is about this, and you should know this because it's important. Because I know someone's gonna be like, no, you're wrong.
Well, maybe it will make you feel better to say that I have the same fear all the time. Well, I have it every day. It never goes away. I just have learned to kind of mitigate, or kind of what I call part X. If you know that name, part X, it's part X that's, I feel like, is trying to keep me down, right, from doing things, engaging in this, telling me that I'm an imposter, right? Imposter syndrome. That I'm not smart enough, and that I don't have interesting things to say. Does it mean I'll always say the right thing? No, it does not. In fact, I will get corrected or say the wrong thing or the wrong word. I just recorded something and I said "tooken" instead of "taken," and that's now permanently going to be out there in the world.
Yeah, I would like to say something,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I'm pretty sure you remember this movie, Beautiful Mind, when when the leading role is talking to everybody in a bar about 19th century American history, and everyone's listening to him. And my experience on art history is I've got a huge issue because up to date, my parents have no idea what I'm doing. And they don't understand just a little bit about art history. They probably hate the 16th century architect who was the topic of my dissertation. And they hate the fact they needed to print it for me and they didn't get what was the whole point about art history. So that's my experience, and I think that our main problem as scholars is the fact that we don't understand why the only interested in our work are other scholars as us. But we don't get it actually. If we keep doing the same things, we are going to have the same results.
Yes, I agree. And that's why I continue to go on this non-traditional path. You know, it doesn't mean there won't be failures or fears, like that fear of someone calling me out or telling me I'm wrong. But then I remember that even when I was doing very traditional publications, like you still have people telling you that you're wrong, right? Like you're going to get that footnote of like some whippersnapper graduate student, you know, citing your stuff saying you're wrong. And you're like, oh, I am wrong. So, I mean, for me, I like to think of it as even when somebody I disagree with, you know, I take the approach of it being a dialogue and a conversation, and we're all building things together and we all can make mistakes and then we can say, oops, and then we can try and grow better. That's not how some people operate. And I think in academia and art history, that is unfortunately not always the way it has played out. But I continue to try to build that. For those of you who answered this question, you're thinking, yes, but it sounds really scary. It is. And it's putting yourself out there in a way that feels really intimidating. I am at my core, I'm a very shy person. That may not be very obvious. I'm very shy. You know, and I get very sad when I get, you know, bad reviews on things because I just, you know, I love it. I've worked on it. You know, I feel it's in my bones. But for whatever reason, I'm also very stubborn in that, you know, what you were just saying, Javier, like my parents, my family, like they really don't understand the world that I've been in art history. I've had more conversations with my mom in the past month since ArtsQ launched about art, where she'll call me and be like, wow, I watched this thing, and she'll have all these questions. That has never happened in the past 2+ decades that I've been working as an art historian. I can tell you that much. So
I really relate to that.
Yeah, you know, and so I, you know, I think that, like I said, I'm really trying to keep that foregrounded in my mind of, you know, how can I lower that barrier? Now, for those of you who are using, you know, how many of you use social media? Just out of curiosity, raise your hands, right? We're all using it in some way, right? Have you ever written a blog post? Even, you know, secretly? Some of you, okay. Have you ever made a reel on Instagram, or you use TikTok or anything like that? Okay, some of you. So those are all aspects, I would say, of public art history. If you're using it to talk about your work, if you're using it to talk about art, if you're using it to talk about, you know, research methods, because at its core, public art history is essentially just storytelling, right? It's finding a good story and a good hook and trying to get other people excited about it in some capacity, right? It's not all that different, in my opinion, from like what fiction authors or even, you know, narrative nonfiction authors are doing, right? It's trying to find a pathway into the issue or the work that you really care about, but finding the way for your audience. So as an example, in thinking about how to, you know, get the young and young at heart excited about art history, we did a lot of kind kind of testing or asking questions to people. Now, kids, they like snacks, right? They love snacks. They like animals, and they like, bodily functions, basically. If you've ever had young kids, you know that, right? So those three things. So it's almost like trying to find a way in through different ways. So for instance, cats, everybody loves cats. The internet loves cats. So you could think about, okay, how is there a way where I can get at issues in the Italian Renaissance, or issues in 16th century Mexico, or issues in, 18th century Chinese painting using cats or snacks or other types of things that can kind of hook people in, and then you can actually talk about the more serious things, right? And that could be in writing, that could be in talking, that could be in multimedia format. But all of this to say that in some ways we're all kind of doing public art history already, whether you know it or not, if ever you're talking about your work in some of these different platforms, in these more public platforms. Now, the way I kind of like to think about public art history too, in a very kind of funny way, and I really like cats, so that's the cat, is I like to think of it as how I can make my family care about what I do. Like I said, because what we do can seem really mysterious. And if it's mysterious to our families, imagine how it seems to people who don't even know us. I've had people say that I'm very scary, I'm intimidating. What I work on is, their eyes, kind of bulge, and I lose them by using the words art history. Or when I say certain things that it feels very stressful to people because they don't have the language maybe, or they feel like they don't have the expertise. And so, like I said, it's trying to find different entry points into talking about these things and kind of meeting people where they're at. And so this is a very simplistic chart. It's not complete. The more completed one was kind of scary and intimidating even to me. But when thinking about public art history, I like using this just as a prompt to thinking about the different ways that one can kind of do both public art history, and even think about, in my opinion, what we kind of need to be training graduate students or training undergraduate students in more, as well as faculty. Because, and this is something you mentioned earlier, Javier, I mean, I think it's ultimately, for our field to thrive and grow, we need to adapt more to different types of things. So on this chart of the so-called new art historian, the more traditional aspects of art history as a field are writing, research, and language skills. And we could break those into their own charts. But those are kind of the core of what we have done traditionally as art historians, right? We write, we do a lot of research and training and develop expertise. And then, of course, you need language skills depending upon what you're working on. Now, let's say you want to engage in different ways in a more public-facing way, or you want to even do very serious academic art history, but say outside of a print journal. You're going to need some of these other types of skills or methods, let's say, to do that. So that would be some combination of these things. It could be a longer list, but like I said, it was kind of scary. That could be things like graphic design, right? Sometimes you might have the best material, ideas, a podcast, a video, but maybe it needs help visually, or maybe you need you're trying to develop a voice or a brand or whatever it might be. Graphic design is something that I think is really important for us as art historians, so sensitive to visual things, to at least know a little bit about, and to be maybe learning some skills. I would lump in there things like learning Adobe Photoshop, or even in a really basic way, how to manipulate images maybe to make them look better or to be able to do certain things with them. Again, depending upon what your ultimate goal is, skills in video making, to me seem really important since we're so visually attuned, especially if we are being honest, we're all like on this thing a lot and we're watching stuff, right? We're watching Instagram reels, we're watching TikTok or YouTube, whatever it might be. Video, like learning the basics of video making, I think are really important, even if you never want to make one. And most people may not want to go down that road, but just having a little bit of knowledge about it, I think helps us critically appreciate or be more aware of how certain choices in videos are, conveying a certain argument, right? Because if you're good at making video, there's a story there, just like there would be in an academic article. And that's likewise with audio. Now, these other two over here, the CMS, which is a content management system. So that's something like, WordPress, or, you're probably using a CMS for, at the university, right? Canvas, or, one of these other types of things that essentially stores and organizes information. Website, building a website. There's a lot of different ways one can do that now. And then UX is user experience. So that's like, you've made all this great stuff. What's it going to be like if you have, say, a website? What's it going to be like to use that website? How are people going to find your stuff? How is it going to be to experience it as somebody who could just come to that place and move through the material? And that's actually a really important part, I think, of engaging in public art history is, what kind of journey do you want people to take through the stuff that you're making? And that could be really basic, or it could be really complex depending upon what your ultimate goal is. Like I said, there could be other things in here, but I think that what I've seen and what I've tried to do with my own students is to give them just really foundational and basic skills in some of these things, like I said, so that when they are, even on social media or they're out and about in the world, they also have like a critical awareness of these things. Yeah.
Everything is very interesting. My wife, she's a graphic designer and an editorial designer, and I stopped of showing her my texts because her critic is ruthless. I mean, she hated them. Everything is in the wrong place, in the wrong way. But I am most interested in user experience, and I would love to know if in Smart History you did at some point some kind of research on user experience, because I think that's one of the strongest points of Smart History. I think the user experience in Smart History is quite good, but I'm not sure if you have at some point hard data, hard evidence about that.
So at one point there was some user testing to gauge, say, the user experience in terms of how people found things or were finding things or searching for things. And so, it was a smaller test, but, I think that's pretty typical for, user testing, right? In terms of trying to ask people to move through and ask, where you're asking them very particular questions about how they access things or search for things. And so, yes, that was done. I think that's generally, it's good practice for any big project to be doing user testing, right? That could be, helpful just to see, what people are looking for, but also how they go about looking for it in the first place. Are you all familiar with the Getty's Florentine Codex project?
Yes.
Okay. So for instance, before that went live, it was, many years in the making. I was asked to be a user tester for the Digital Florentine Codex, kind of when it was in its earlier stages. And so when you're brought in to do that kind of user testing, they're asking you, click on this, or, and someone's out there with you. And then it's like, okay, well, what do you see when you're here? Like, if you needed to go find this, how would you go about doing it? And, and it was really interesting to, I think, to be on the experiential side of that, and trying to give them lots of feedback so that, they can, of course, then improve what it's like to experience that or to use it. And it's a fantastic project now too. They've done a lot of work, but I think that user experience is something not to be discounted. It's really, really important because, like I said, you could have the greatest public-facing project, and it's so confusing to navigate around it. Or like you click on something and you're like, oh, where have I gone? I don't know how to get back. What have I done?
On the other hand, projects as Medici archive project is unbelievable complicated. I mean, it is so
Yes,
unfriendly to
that's
navigate.
right.
And we are all aware of how important is user experience, and yet we have very unfriendly apps or blog presses that they are useless actually.
Yes, that's right. And unfortunately, I see this with too many public-facing projects that have excellent teams, great ideas, amazing things to say, but then it's really, like you were just saying, you're like, where it's really frustrating to use because you don't know how to use it, and then you keep trying, but then you can't replicate it then when you go back, right, where you've forgotten the complex steps that it took to get there. And so, the average person, if we're thinking even outside of academics, the average person, you want them to get to something as soon as possible, like 1 or 2 clicks, because most people are not going to click through 3, 4, or 5 things to get to where they want to go, right? They're going to be like, I'm out of here, done, gone, I'm going on to the next thing. And so I think that for any type of public facing, and I'm speaking to like big projects, you build a website and you got a lot of stuff, or you create some type of cool, like a digital mapping project. The user experience is something that's so important for the longevity of the project, right? Because I won't name any names, but I can think of some big institutions and museums that have funneled millions of dollars, and I literally mean millions of dollars, towards big projects. And then they just disappear shortly thereafter because no one's using them, because it's just not a pleasant experience to use them. And it's like, if people don't see the relevance, they won't come back, right? And so, this is all of this, by the way, no single person can do all of these things. That's also what I want to reassure you, is no single person should be doing all of these things and trying to do them all on their own. And I have something on this later, but this is where collaboration and working in connection with people is really important, even if it's one other person, because we can't be everything to everyone all the time. And in fact, you don't want to, dilute yourself so that you're trying to do everything. It's more of a seeing like, here's my skill set, here's your skill set. How can we make magic happen in some capacity, right? Based on those questions that you want to answer. Which I think is a good place to say, like, okay, so where do you start, right? Like, how do you, this person's face here kind of captures like how I often sometimes feel, like very large eyes. You're like, okay, so where do I start? And so again, our most important questions, always keep in mind, who is your target audience? If you're in kind of fiction writing or nonfiction writing, it's your ideal reader. Like, who is it that you want to be engaging with your stuff? And you can't say anyone, everyone, because that's not going to be helpful. It's like, you think of like that one person. So, if your ideal reader is like your mom, right? Or your dad, right? Then like, you kind of build out from there. And so always having that in your mind is so helpful because it steers the whole purpose of what you're doing and what you're trying to make, right? Whether that's visually or what you're saying or what you're writing. Again, the so what, like, why do you even want to do this? Always really important. And then like, how do you reach them, right? Again, we don't live in a if you build it they will come world anymore, right? So you always have to be thinking of like, great, I have my audience, I know I'm doing it, but how will they find me and how will I find them? And so thinking about ways to reach that audience is, in my opinion, very important as well. Okay, so writing, you're terrified of speaking, you want to write some kind of public facing thing. It's really just about practicing and editing. So the current, I like to say, it's trial and error. It's just constantly practicing. So if you're interested in writing public facing art history, I think the first question is, where do you want it to be published, right? Like, are you thinking more of like a newspaper? Is it, for a more kind of adult audience? Is it something that's going to be more, kind of fun and kind of younger friendly? And so, as you're kind of practicing this type of writing, keeping in mind ultimately where you want it to go is important. If you're writing for a blog, that's maybe different than if you're trying to write for an important national newspaper or something of that ilk, right? Like if I was trying to get something pitching to the New York Times, I would write very differently than if I'm writing a blog post about like cats and art history, right? The best piece of advice I can give you, if you're thinking about writing public art history, is write it like you talk. Don't write it like you would read something, right? Write it like you would talk. Say you're talking to a friend or someone else in this class. How would you actually say that out loud versus writing beautiful prose that you would submit to your advisor or your professor or a journal? Was there a question?
Yeah, more or less. You are making very happy some of my students
Oh,
that think that I'm too serious with academic jargon.
Academic jargon and flourishes. This is again like, who are you writing for, right? Like if you're writing for your professor or your academic advisor, that makes sense. But I can tell you, if you're writing for a public facing audience and you use words like discourse or even specialized terms without explaining them, like if I were to go and write for a public facing audience and use words like discourse or chiaroscuro or linear
Agency.
perspective, or even things like hermeneutics. You've lost your audience, right? You've lost people unless there's a really, really good reason to use those words and you explain them and couch them. Public facing art history, those are not words that I'm going to be like talking to my husband, be like, if we're talking about, hermeneutics, and he'd be like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm gone. So it's about really keeping in mind, like, who are you writing for? If you are working with images, and this is something that, if you have questions about, I love talking about images, but, if you are planning to use them in your public facing writing, and you have some sense of where you want to be publishing it, knowing how to use images and what you can use and what you can't use and how to make them look is something to start thinking about very early. I can say that from being an editor, sometimes people have, like when I worked at Smart History, essays that were great, but then there are no images to be found, no good ones, or like no images that are were available for kind of public use, which means you can't publish that type of essay, right? And so, we're art historians, we love visual things. And so trying to make sure that you can support whatever it is that you're writing with images is something that unfortunately I think happens, like people think about it at the end versus thinking about it from the get-go. Because I can tell you, when you're writing for public, beautiful images are really, really seductive and important, right? As much as the writing.
That was another very strong point in smart history. I mean, you got some of the most wonderful and workable images I've ever seen for a new platform as smart history, and you did it personally. I mean, you took the job and you did it in a wonderful way. I think that was very important. That was one of the strongest points of smart history.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think beautiful images, not just beautiful images, right? Like finding the right image and beautiful images. And what I can tell you is that in the work that I've done at Smart History and at ArtsQ, and even beyond that for students in projects that I've done with them, images that have been processed through Photoshop, right? To straighten them, to crop them, to remove the yellow that inevitably happens whenever you take a photograph, to, crop, just to kind of make them more aesthetically pleasing, can be very persuasive. And I've published on this before, like student projects where I had one student who knew Photoshop really well, and his photographs for this project were amazing. And then students doing other projects, they're like taking like photos on their phone and they're all crooked and like out of focus, or like, things are cropped out. And the difference between them, like students read that. And I think people generally read that as it's less good, it's less important, it's less informative than the one with the well-crafted and beautiful images, because images are so important to the argument. And so I think that that is something that I would really encourage you all to think about if you do things with images, is how important it is as part of your story and as part of the argument. I'm still like ashamed at some of the images in my book that I took because they took them so long ago, before I was a great photographer. And I'm like, oh, they're so sad. And now, again, practice through a lot of trial and error of taking good photos, and then also learning something like Photoshop really can make a difference in what you're trying to do. Sad image, you're probably going to lose them right away, right? Because they're going to be like, what is this very sad, blurry yellow thing that I'm looking at? Like, I'm out of here.
Agree.
Yeah. And so images are really important. And I think that, again, things I would share, reading aloud. I do this for everything, even my academic publications, reading things aloud. It's really scary to read your own work aloud, because you often find that, your sentences are too long, or you're like, wow, I've used the same verb about 20 times. This sounds terrible. And there's a rhythm to it. Of course, sharing it with other people. But when you're writing public facing art history, this is something that I will also say is, most people are not going to be great at it from the get-go. Like any new skill in academia, we are not trained to write public facing work. It is a totally different way of writing and approach to writing, and it takes time and practice. And if you start out and it really doesn't go well, just keep practicing, because like any new skill, it's going to take time. And with that, I will also say, and this feeds into the imposter syndrome I mentioned earlier, is, when you're looking at other people who have done public facing art history or done any type of public facing projects, look at them and feel inspired by them, but definitely don't compare yourself to them like, oh, my work is not nearly as good. And if you feel this despair, So the like compare and despair, don't do it. See them and feel inspired is great. But ultimately, you also have to remember you got to find your own unique voice to connect with the public, right? I tend to rely on humor or kind of, puns, or, I'm very passionate. I can't do like something beyond that without sacrificing my authenticity. Even if I'm talking in a conversation or an audio, it's really hard for me to like be hushed and be quiet. Like I have to spend so much time thinking about that I end up sacrificing my authentic voice. And my authentic voice is like, I'm very excited. I'm like a puppy dog. I'm very excited. I make jokes. Right? So like that's like that's just who I am. And so I think that that's something that I would really encourage you all is like, don't forget that your unique voice is great. And like, if you find the people that you're trying to connect with, they're going to love that voice, not trying to be somebody else who you're not. And that's for writing, or if you're doing something like a podcast or video, like just remember that is so, so important. I brought this in just to show you. On the left is like I don't like reading my own published work because I want to change it always, because I don't, I find so many things I want to change. But this is the opening to an essay that was published in one of those books that I showed you earlier. And like, this is a perfect example of, I would never publish this for something public facing. I would never say this aloud in a video because it wouldn't work. And so I would have to do the work of translation myself into something that I know really well and that I've published, but I'd have to be like, okay, how do I make non-academics care about this Gallego painting, right? Like using words like, supplication or things like that. That's not going to fly with, people outside of, art history in an academic fashion. So that idea of translation, and again, your unique voice is gonna really play into that.
I was thinking that in order to break the rules, you first need to know the rule.
That's right.
Of course, it's a podcast, and of course, you are not gonna use that, but you need first to know why that was thought that way.
Yes. Oh, very much. And I think that gets at the heart of that wheel that I was showing you all earlier about like the new art historian. It's like you can have all those great skills, but if you don't have the expertise and the knowledge and the research to back it up, then that's also a problem. So skills are great, but also knowing the system, knowing the traditions, the canon, whatever it is that we want to talk about is equally important, because if you want to buck the system, you have to know how to play within the system and what you're actually pushing up against. That's very true. Now, some of you maybe are interested beyond writing of getting your voice out there, maybe in a podcast. Maybe that's, a podcast where, you don't want anyone to know about it, but you want to try it, right? You want to like test it out. And that's, the audio component. And in some ways, it's exactly, the beginning is exactly like the writing, right? Like maybe you're like, I don't want to deal with images. That's just, way too much complication, or I don't have this skill set, but I want to try to connect with people, and I have, an idea. So it's the same practice as the writing, right? Maybe you have a script or an outline, but again, you talk like a normal person, not like you're giving a conference paper, but like you're talking to somebody at a cafe. You find your audience, you keep them in mind. But of course, you have to be able to edit the audio. And so learning skills like that are important for, I think, crafting public art history if you're doing some type of audio component. So this is, for instance, GarageBand, free if you have a Mac. There's programs like Audacity that are free if you have a PC. And I will tell you that one of the most humbling things I've ever had to learn is how to edit an audio. It took me forever to understand how to do it, because I look at this and I'm like, I'm seeing waves. This is so different than anything I've ever had to do. And it was very humbling, I will tell you, in a very frustrating way, in the time it took me to learn how to do it. But ultimately, it's just practice. Practice. And if you know somebody who knows how to do it, asking for help or like having them listen. And once you kind of get accustomed to it, it's a skill you don't lose. And so really that's kind of beyond writing, the extra step that one needs to learn for a podcast. And then you're running, right? You learn how to edit and then you're off and running. Things that I would recommend too, if you're interested in that, is like having a great mic. I have this very silly mic that I now use here off to the side for certain things. I have, portable mics. Really, it's just about experimentation, right? So the thing that hopefully I'm conveying is, going into this with a spirit of adventure, right? And to experiment. And like, if something doesn't work, then you keep tinkering and you keep trying and you just modify things and then you keep trying again. With public art history, the thing that I see often is people get totally panicked when it doesn't work out right away. And then they stop because it seems really daunting and scary. Instead of just kind of keep trying, even if it's slowly, because, it is, like I said, a skill set that one has to practice and learn. And so that experimenting, getting creative, I love seeing when people are getting creative and trying to find new ways to connect with people in a podcast and writing, or in things like video. Now, if this is something that any of you are kind of interested in, like, more multimedia, where it's, writing, it's the audio, and then of course, you're pairing all these things with still and moving images. Video is a great opportunity. People love to see moving images, right? Like I said, if you're on social media, you're seeing people do it in Reels, or if you're on YouTube. And so this idea of telling stories through video is really compelling. But it can be pretty daunting. To do video. I say that from my own experience, and I say that from now working with my team at ArtsQ, where it can be really humbling to learn new things that you're not good at first, especially because we all like to be A+, right? A+, and we're not used to being okay with like a C at first. And so again, it's that idea of, that spirit of adventure, of experimentation, and also just working with others and realizing that, we can share knowledge, we can share skills, we can give supportive feedback to help other people learn in like a caring and kind way. That's really important too. I just thought I would show you. So this is an in-process video about figurines from Tlatelolco, and you can see, I'm trying to, I've removed the sad beige walls that were behind the objects of the museum because that wasn't helping to the story. And you can see all these things down here. These are just like different things that have been added in to kind of make this video. And so again, just to kind of give you a sense of like the multimedia aspect of video can be really exciting. And I love it because, it's a challenge to try to think of like how to make a story both sound compelling, but look compelling. And like, how do you keep people's interest, right? Like most people now want to watch like 30 seconds or a minute, right, on TikTok. And you're like, how do you keep their interest for 4 minutes? That's a challenge in and of itself. And so this is just another screenshot of like a more complex video where you can see there's like a lot of things happening, different animations and various things. So this is something like I've been practicing with video since, gosh, 2011, something like that. So, I mean, this is something that I've been kind of adding different skills to for a long time. But, I would encourage people to like start small. Like if you're used to making reels or TikTok videos, or you're used to doing YouTube shorts or whatever it is, or just even making videos on your phone and sending them to your mom, whatever, like use that as an entry point, right? Do something really simple and just do that for a while, and then push yourself to do one little extra thing at a time. You don't want to go from being like no skills or very little skills to saying like, I want to be like, millions of followers on YouTube. That's doesn't happen for most people, right? It's trying to like just incrementally push yourself to think about how you can craft good public facing things one little step at a time.
If I may, I can see why this is so scary for old age white male scholars all over the world. I mean, when I was fellow as undergraduate student, one of my tasks was doing PowerPoints for my teachers because they had no clue to do a PowerPoint.
Yeah. And a PowerPoint is a perfect example.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
This is absolutely scary.
Yeah. Well, it's terrifying to me, y'all. Like when I have to make things and then I know it's going to go live and I watch the video that's now out there in the public and I see so many things I want to change. But that's true of anything I publish. And it's true, like the PowerPoint slides are a perfect example, right? Like when I'm teaching and I'm showing things on the screen, like if my PowerPoints, I mean, I spend way more time than I'll ever admit to any of you on my PowerPoints because I'm aware of the power that they have in keeping people's interest and excitement alive in the classroom. And if I have really sad images and PowerPoints, I've lost the students before I've even started talking. And so it's that same exact idea of like compelling visuals paired with, of course, compelling, spoken words. But you could also make videos, you guys, without even talking if you're nervous about that. Lots of people make videos where they just write the text on TikTok, on YouTube, wherever it is that you want to be placing these things. You can tell a story just with the text and the images without even having to talk. So this is that part of getting creative, like figuring out what works for you and is connecting with your audience. One thing I would mention here, and I'm happy to share this PowerPoint beyond this if that's of use to anyone, but is again, just thinking about what you like, whether that's related to art history or not, and like studying those people, not to copy them, but to like adapt and learn different things from them. Like maybe you go to a museum website and you're like, I love this part, but I really don't like this, but this thing that they're doing here is cool. Or you are watching videos and you're like, I love this. I want to adapt this to what I'm doing. So like studying what other people are doing is such a great way to be inspired and thinking about how you can challenge yourself to do it better. And I do that almost daily, whether that's, reading things or watching things or listening to things and saying like, oh, I love this little part of what they're doing. And I wonder if I can find a way to do that myself. Like this one here. This is a screenshot of a video was a request by my oldest daughter who is obsessed with llamas. And so she was like, do something about llamas. And I was like, okay, we're going to do something about llamas, and I made a video. I didn't like it. So I literally
Yes,
scratched it and started fresh because it wasn't an audience that I was going to, it was too much for graduate. And so I had to kind of redo it. And so, you know, I think then, now I have the time and wrap things up, but I happily, we can kind of wrap up here, or if you all are interested, you know, we can have questions and conversations about photography, manage projects on a bigger scale or scale if that's of interest to you. But I mean, I would love to hear more of your questions and or concerns.
Well,
or how I can help you. So
first of all, Lauren, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much. We really appreciated you taking the time and sharing these experiences with us. And we know well you have been doing this for a long time, and it's been a huge life experience for you and for some other people I know well. I know Heather Graham is working with you, and I love also the job of the work of Heather. I would like my students to do some questioning here right now, but also
yeah.
I would like you to hear what are they doing. Because
oh yes,
in the particular case of Caro, who is here with me, Caro started to think to do something about Percy Jackson movies, and I convinced her not to do it. And I think that was a mistake by my side. But she let me convince her. So I would love to let them to question you about your experiences, but also I would love if they can tell you about a couple of sentences about their jobs. So
I would love that. I would love to hear that.
Who's gonna be first?
Here, let me stop sharing my screen.
Excellent.
Hi, my name is Daniela, and I am working on a project about 3 paintings from the Pre-Raphaelite movement. They are called La Belle d'Antamassi. And what I want to do is analyze those 3 paintings with a theory called the monstrous feminine. It's kind of like a yes. It's not like a psychological like theory, but what I want to analyze is how the monstrous feminine figures in those 3 paintings and the story itself, because it's the same story based on the same poem by 3 different authors, and that's what I want to do.
Well, that sounds great. And I love the idea of the monstrous feminine as a lens to talk about that. That sounds very exciting.
In my opinion, the work of Daniela is mainly argumenting about a different version of the femme fatale and how the literary source is seen through the lens of, don't forget that, 3 male painters.
Yes.
And that is driving me to a question I've been thinking around for the whole talk, and is we are still having a lot of trouble with new methodologies in art history. We still have a lot of trouble with critical race theory and gender studies and feminist point of views and decolonial, post-colonial, whatever colonial studies. And my question to you is, do you think public art history is going to be a better, most improved channel to use these kind of ideas and trying to make it work the way we are not being able to do it through the traditional art history?
It's a question that I think about a lot. I mean, I think that
I
public art
know,
history.
I know you think a lot about that,
Yeah,
and
I
you are
do. I
fully, and
do.
you are fully aware of that, and that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, it's it's a question where I think my answer changes regularly, or at least shifts depending upon what's happening. I mean, I think that public art history has some of the same challenges that traditional academic art history has, right? In terms of shifts in conversations or what the public is connecting with, or where how you communicate those stories, right? Like I've been seeing lots of people saying like YouTube is dead, and I don't actually believe that, but like there are these kinds of shifts of like, the 1 minute video, is taking over from long form video, right? Like no one has the attention span for anything past 30 seconds anymore, and so I think that similar to what you're saying about methodologies and theories, public art history has to be sensitive to changes in technology, changes in like how people are consuming. So maybe it's a different type of things to be aware of, but it's not that different from kind of grappling with those same theoretical issues. I think that public art history can be a great way to get more people engaged in some of those conversations, whether they're aware of it or not, right? Like, I'm not going to come out of the gates and say like, let's talk about phenomenology, unless I have like a philosophy channel and like that's the goal. But like if I want to bring in a discussion of, something informed by phenomenology and art history, I would just find a way to do that without maybe using some of those words, right? And so it's like people are immersed in it or getting some, experience with it, but without maybe even fully knowing that. And so I think that's where that translation issue is really important. So I think the different realms of public art history, there's certainly opportunity there. Like I would love to see some type of public facing art history project that really is like really theoretical, right? Like there's a great YouTube channel called Philosophy for Breakfast. Not an art historian, but like all he talks about is like really intense like philosophy, or it's religion for breakfast, religion for breakfast. And it's like philosophy and religion. And like he has a big audience and it's super cool. I'm like, I would love to see an art historian do that. Like, let's talk about these really dense theoretical things, but in a more casual way. Like, how great would that be? That would be so interesting for everyone. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, clearly I would love to see more art historians do more public facing work in creative ways, but it is scary, right? It's hard to put yourself out there.
It is.
Yeah. So what other things are people working on?
No one? Oh. Frida, please.
Okay, for example, mine is a mural.
Habla fuerte para que la cámara te escuche.
Déjame acerco. My topic is a mural from Hidalgo in the 16th century. And I have trouble with that you have said, that is I am not like too into pre-Hispanic thing, but not also into the Occidental perspective. So I have been having trouble with that because I don't know if I'm wrong, if I'm right. If for example, many professors they told me, professors, teachers, many teachers, they told me like, no, you have to first see what the Occidental view and then the Hispanic one, and others have they told me like completely the opposite. So I am having trouble with that. And with speaking or writing to like if I will talk in public, I have trouble with that. And
Guilty as charged. I am guilty as charged. Our main argument is about how Frida perceives that she needs to write, and she's very good in writing as she speaks, but we are learning the rules here first. So I think that's not a problem as far as she's aware of who's talking with. And that's going to happen in the next couple of months. But the other thing is more difficult because of the criteria of establishing the truth. And I am not concerned with that. Personally, her truth is her truth, and that's okay. She needs to work with that. But she's very concerned about it, and that's correct. One teacher is telling me I need to do A, and the other one is telling me to do X, and in the middle there are a number of different variations. And I can see why she's concerned about that. The problem of the language is more, at this point, is more a joke between us.
Yeah, I mean, I will share that, I tend to write very plain language. So not simple per se, but plain language because of that kind of longer mission of working in a field where most people have no idea, like you're saying, Frida, of like which perspective or where we are. Where, I mean, I can't even tell you. Just recently, someone was like, what? There was painting in like what? Where in Mexico at this time? Like, I've never heard of this. And I'm like, okay, person who studies this thing, very small little thing. So I mean, I oh no, I was gonna say I also write like I talk, and it took me a long time to learn those rules in the proper way for publications. I still have people when I submit publications, when I use first person, say you're not allowed to use first person. I'm like, really? We're still there. No, you can do it, but it is, I get
it. Anyone else?
Okay. My name is Jimena, and I am working on the illustrations that Botticelli did for the Divine Comedy, and I'm trying to see if there's like a possible relationship with the fact that he didn't finish them and Savonarolas preaching in the time. And I was thinking about what you said that, for example, the trauma that the academia left on us, or at least personally me, is that when I go into, for example, YouTube and I search for videos about um, some subject. Yesterday I was watching the TED Talk, TED Education animations that they do, and I think they are great, but at the same time, I think like I feel bad because I'm not reading something academic, so I feel that's not valid. But if I feel that way, I can't imagine people that are not in the history um circle, like maybe they're never gonna click into a video about art because they're gonna be scared about if they're not gonna understand it or something. So I think public art is something really important, but at the same time, it's difficult to approach, even if it's there, like free. So I really appreciate people that go out of their comfort zone and do um, content about these things that seem too scary, but they do it in a way that people can approach them. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I everything you said resonates with me and makes sense. And yeah. And it is scary. I won't lie. Like it is scary. I mean, YouTube, especially if you're on YouTube, there's some weird things that can happen out there with people you don't know.
I would like to get back to something you just said about the seriousness of public art history. And I'm going to use the case of Paul because she's working about the representation of the devil in Middle Ages. And a couple of days ago, we had this conversation about how difficult is her job because the sources are not serious, because they are internet and they are not quoting anyone, and they don't tell at all where the information is coming from. And I think that's a perfect example of how seriousness issue is affecting the way we see public art history in terms of information. And I would love if Pau can talk something a little bit about that.
About my work. Well, yeah, I haven't found like sources really academic, like really a few. Some of them are like pages on the internet, and I haven't like seen them serious because they are like little bibliography, sorry, and I didn't even go and search into YouTube or I don't know, Instagram or something like that because we have this perspective that they are in serious sources. And well, if I haven't found them in books, less in in YouTube or something like that. But I find important that we change like that perspective because it can be serious. Maybe we haven't found like the right sources because I have seen this woman that makes videos about art history, but she never um, mentions the sources, and I think that could be like a step for making public art history more serious.
Agreed. I agree. Well, I heard two things from what you just mentioned about your project. And that is first, that maybe what you're doing is if you're treating those so-called non-serious sources as in a serious way, that can shift the field. So I hear trailblazer when I hear things like that, right? Like you're paving a way, and that's scary to people, and that's scary for yourself, but that's important. And it means often that, again, like people won't really know what to do because it's unusual, right? But so like that's important, right? Treating so-called non-serious things in a more serious way. And the second thing I heard is, again, about, I think that I very much agree that, being honest around sources that you're reading for public art history, whether that's making nod to them in the writing or if you're speaking or putting them as a bibliography afterwards, is definitely part of that. And finding a way also that if, say, you have a website that's aimed at kids, like, and you put a bunch of bibliography, that's scary to them. You also have to find a way to like to put that out there, and that expertise and that background. But again, how they engage with things. But I mean, I think that the serious alters and all of those things.
We had a couple of seconds. We lost you for a couple of seconds.
I see that. I'm guessing that was me. A tree probably fell here in Portland and did something.
No storm so far, right?
So right now it's sunny.
Okay. Fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed. Well, I'm not sure where I cut off, but all I have to say that I think that the question of seriousness is one that is very important. And I think that it's a really complex question that maybe is a different conversation. But, I remember going up for tenure, for instance, and people who all the public facing work, which at that point was like 300,000 words plus video, like a lot of public facing stuff. And several people on the tenure committee said, that's a nice hobby, but it doesn't count towards tenure. And I was very annoyed by this and made a fuss. And made the argument, but there were people that to them it was not serious work that should count towards tenure. And after I got tenure, you can imagine how grumpy I was, grumpier. But I think it is a challenge in part because so many academic standards are rigid and in place, and they're really old and traditional, and so new things aren't read as more serious. I've been told by people that I could be read as more serious if I smile less, which, okay.
You're perfect the way you are. Don't change.
Well, thank you. Thank you. But do you know what I mean? Like, these are things that people have to contend with, and I've been very serious. I've done the very serious thing. I'm very serious. I give the serious papers. I write the serious books. And ultimately, that's not, again, where I'm directing my energies, because that's not what feels important to me now, where I am at this stage of my career. But the serious issue is one that you all will have to contend with, whether you're doing public art history or not, unfortunately.
If you want a perfect definition of what gatekeeping is, you just mentioned it. I mean, that kind of rudeness and politeness, and in telling you if that's a hobby, I mean, you can even think about it, but don't even mention it, for God's sake.
Yes, yeah, agreed.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I personally feel like I have the same issue as you. I tend to be very casual about presentations, and I try to write my papers like the way I want to read them. So I like will make jokes, or I will try to do puns and stuff. And it's like it's very hard for me not to do that, especially in like academic works. Like right now, the essay, I do write like puns, and it's like I'm not supposed to, and it's really hard for me not to do that, and especially like during presentations, because the research paper we're writing right now, we're going to present it to like the whole school, well, not the school, but like our department, and it's like I have to really dial it back, because I feel like when I present my papers, I tend to do it like gossipy, or like talking to my friends, or like I'm constantly trying to make people laugh, but it's supposed to be serious, and it's really hard for me to not do that. And I feel like that I was talking to some professors. I was like, I feel like I'm way too casual, and that's not great right now for school.
It is for me.
It's a struggle, and I think like any of the things that we've been talking about, it's a skill, right? To learn. Like I said, I am a very shy person, and it took me a long time to be okay with public speaking. And and it's like a theater mask that I can put on now, and I can adopt that personality, and I can do it successfully, and I can stand up in front of 600 students like I've done many times, and that's fine too. It doesn't necessarily come naturally, but I think, it's ultimately, I see it as, a skill to be learned, so that when you're in those spaces and you play by those rules and you want to connect with that, like I see it as connection, right? Like if you want to connect with that group and, you learn those skills, even if it's hard and challenging, it's very similar to how I see doing public art history, right? Learning that skill set and being able to connect with that type of engagement. It's similar strategies, just a different audience. But I understand that very much.
Lauren, we so enjoyed this talk, and we so appreciate you taking the time. We know it's quite early in the West Coast, and you have your daughters around.
Oh, they're gone now.
And good luck with the tooth of the toddler. And I would love to talk more, but really, we really appreciate this. And I didn't work with Smart History when able to do it, and I'm extremely sorry about that. But if I can help in any way in ArtsQ, please let me know.
Oh,
I would.
well, thank you. Well, I will follow up with that. And thank you for inviting me into the class, and hopefully there's something of interest. But please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Javier has my email, so please don't. I'm not a scary person. I enjoy helping people learn. If you have questions based on this, or just you're interested in learning more or opportunities, I'm always around. So even if it takes me a couple weeks to respond.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all. And yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of today.
Thank you. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.